store was a little bigger.
Most of the time, it's all I can handle, but stuff like this. But then this way we get to say that our events stand room only. So that's kind of a positive spin of things, too. Um, we thank you for coming tonight and supporting Winona and supporting independent bookstores. We will have been here 7 years next month. So and thank all of you for shopping local and keeping it local and being here tonight. I will go ahead and introduce Winona. She is the Executive Director of Food and Water Watch. She has worked extensively on food, water, energy, and environmental issues at the national, state, and local level. The book, Foodopoly, The Battle Over the Future of Food and Farming in America, examines the corporate consolidation and control over our food system and what it means for farmers and consumers. When she was 11, Winona's father bought a Strapple farm in Bull Run Mountains of Virginia. There she developed appreciation for what it really means to grow food. She picked potato bugs, plucked chickens, and chopped kindling. Today, Winona is experienced in developing policy decisions and legislative strategies. She is also a skilled and accomplished organizer, having lobbied and developed grassroots field strategy and action plans. From 1997 to 2005, she served as Director of Public Systems Energy and Environment Program, which focused on water, food, and energy policy. From 1996 to 1997, she was Environmental Policy Director for Citizen Action, where she worked with the organization's 30 state-based groups. From 1989 to 1995, she was at the Union of Concerned Scientists, where as a senior organizer she coordinated broad-based, grassroots, sustainable energy campaigns in several states. She has an MS in Applied Anthropology from the University of Maryland. Please welcome Winona.
It is so great to be here in Des Moines tonight, and I feel so bad that so many of you are standing up. But welcome. So I did grow up on a farm. When I was 11, my dad, who had grown up in Oklahoma during the Dust Bowl, decided we needed to get back to the farm. My parents had been missionaries, and they didn't have very much money. So we ended up on this farm that no one had farmed in decades, and in fact, nobody had actually lived in the house for about 40 years. So we never had plumbing. Dad never got around to the plumbing, but he had read organic gardening beginning in the 1950s, and was really excited to be there and start applying some of those practices. And like you heard in the introduction, I did a lot of farm labor, and I can tell you I could not wait to get away from that farm when I was 18 to go away and go to college. But, you know, I learned the most valuable lessons probably of my whole life, living there and seeing how difficult it is today to be a farmer and how much work it is and how important it is. So I've been an organizer, activist, advocate ever since then, but I've always really kept that memory of what it is to live on a farm. And having worked on food and farming issues for the last several years, I've been very concerned the way some people, especially urban people, tend to blame farmers for our dysfunctional food system. And there's so many misunderstandings about why the food system doesn't work. So I really wrote Foodopoly to try to start a debate about these issues, especially a debate among those urban audiences, among the people in the good food movement who often hear that all the problem is subsidies, get rid of the subsidies and everything's going to be okay. So I want to talk just a little bit about how we ended up getting here. I'm sure many of you know this story, but please bear with me. And I'm going to start back in the 1930s. You know, last week I did a book event similar to this in Chicago, and I had a lot of you college students, and I started talking about these things, and I noticed all of a sudden people got their equipment out and started texting and reading email. The whole idea that we were going to start back in the 1930s was like put people to sleep. But you look like people who can stick with me. So, as you probably remember from your history lessons, the Roosevelt administration came into office in part because they wanted to do something about rural poverty, because of course people in rural areas during the Depression were suffering even more than in urban areas. There was malnutrition, people were losing their farms, and it was really a deplorable state of affairs. So they came into office, and in 1933 the first farm bill was passed, and it's ironic that right now that the Congress is considering a farm bill in the House. Senate, of course, has already passed their terrible bill, and will probably get a much worse one in the House. But in 1933, there was a lot of idealism, and the administration wanted to do things to bring the income of rural people, of farmers, up to par with urban people, and they called this parity. And they did a number of things to help make this possible. They instituted supply management programs because, of course, part of the bane of farmers is overproduction. It drives down the price of crops, and then farmers don't even get what it actually costs to put the crop in. So they did things like take millions of acres out of production, or made it possible to, if it looked like there were going to be too many crops going in, so that they could help manage supplies, or the supply of crops. They started a grain reserve. China's had a grain reserve since AD 54. And this grain reserve meant that in years of abundance, farmers would put commodity grains into the silos on their farms, and when there was a drought or a problem, they could pull the grains out. This was a very common sense idea that helped stabilize prices and made it possible for farmers to get a fair price. And then there were other programs that created a price floor for farmers so they could be sure that they would at least get the cost of production. So these policies worked really well through World War II. And you'll remember that during the war, the U.S. produced the food for the Allies. And after World War II, when Europe was devastated, when the colonial governments were fallen, and there was a lot of hunger around the world, the U.S. continued to produce food, and these policies worked really well. But things had really changed, as we all know, as a result of the war. The center of finance and economic power had shifted from Europe to the United States, so the financial capital from London to New York. And the U.S. had become an industrial powerhouse. And there were a group of very prominent business leaders and politicians who believed that the future for the U.S. was not living on farms and producing food, like 54% of the population did at that time, about 6.8 million farms. They believed the future was getting all those young men off the farm into industrial areas to be cheap labor. And they began developing a strategy for doing this. Now, there was a particular group of men who were especially influential in doing this, and they formed an organization that was called a Committee for Economic Development. And this Committee for Economic Development was started by some prominent men like Paul Hoffman, who was the CEO of Studebaker, and he went on to work with the UN Development Program. He was an administrator of the Marshall Plan under the Truman administration. He eventually went to work for the Ford Foundation and was one of the architects of the Green Revolution. There was another man named William Hoffman, who was one of the first individuals who had experience in doing research on how you can persuade consumers to behave differently. using polling and advertising and those types of tools. So these men got together, and this wasn't a wild conspiracy. This is men of the same background, same class, same business interests, getting together and deciding how they could build a strategy to create the labor pool that they needed and to change the economics and politics of the New Deal. And these men also were concerned about having a very vibrant rural population, because if we all remember our history, after the Civil War, it was farm organizations that were really on the vanguard of activism, fighting the banks because the banks had so many unfair practices, wouldn't loan farmers money, fighting the railroads who were not giving a fair price in shipping not only crops but all sorts of different products. And farm groups were really, for many decades, they were the head of the populist revolution. They worked with labor, they elected their own candidates, and a lot of this history has really been erased from our history books. But these men in the mid-1940s knew their history, and they were thrilled about this population of young men coming back from the war and going and becoming farmers and making a good living, and maybe not agreeing with their vision of the world, of this shift of power to the industrial north and getting young men off the farm. So they did a very good job of introducing these ideas throughout the business community. They were able to get most of the titans of industry to join the Committee for Economic Development. And by the 1950s, when President Eisenhower was elected, they had begun to gain traction with some of these ideas. Now, one of the secretaries of agriculture under the Eisenhower administration was Ezra Benson. And Ezra Benson, well, I think you can only describe him as an ideologue. He really hated farm policies. And when you read about it, I think he kind of hated farmers, too. He believed that the Roosevelt-era farm programs were leading the country towards communism. And, this was during the McCarthy period, and the communists were being seen behind every tree. And so he began to use his power as Secretary of Agriculture to chip away at that parity, or the idea that farmers should make an income on par with urban populations. And meanwhile, the Committee for Economic Development was really gaining steam. By 1962, they had become a very influential organization, and they wrote a report called An Adaptive Plan for Agriculture. And what it basically said, in a lot of long-winded phrases, is that we have to get rid of all of these old New Deal programs, and we really need to globalize food production. The U.S. should produce grains. We need to get young men off the farm and into productive work in urban areas, and we need to stop training young men to go into agriculture when they're in high school and to guide them into another career. Now, this report got a lot of publicity because by this time the Committee for Economic Development had many, many institutions represented in it, not just business leaders. It was the publishing industry, many universities, in fact, 18 different economics departments from some of the most prestigious universities helped put together that report, An Adaptive Plan for Agriculture. And members of Congress, in fact, in the first couple of decades of the Committee for Economic Development's history, Angry, they had 38 members who held public office, and 2 of their members were presidents of the Federal Reserve Board. So they were an influential lot. And this report got a lot of publicity, and it made the farm organizations and farmers who were aware of it very angry. And by this time, the 2 co-chairs of the CED were the president of Sears and the president of Ford. And so some of the farm organizations organized what they would call catalog marches. They would drive around the state capitol, or in the case of a convention of a farm organization, kind of the courthouse, and they'd take their Sears catalog, drive their Fords or maybe Chevrolets, and have a march in their vehicles, and then they would burn those catalogs. So there was a lot of activism and a lot of recognition about what was going on during this period, all things that have now really disappeared. So by the 1970s, the farm policies from the 1930s had been significantly chipped away. And under the Nixon administration, some dramatic changes took place. Now, you'll remember that in 1972, Richard Nixon was running against George McGovern, and it was a very contentious race. And the Secretary of Agriculture at that time was a protege of Ezra Benson. His name was Earl Butz. I'm sure many of you remember Earl Butz. I remember him. He was the butt of a lot of jokes. And he often put his foot in his mouth. He was arrogant. And today nobody knows who the Secretary of Agriculture is. I mean, unless you follow these things, everybody knew who Earl Butz was. And he told, as you know, told farmers to get big or get out, told them to plant from fence row to fence row, told farmers they needed to borrow a lot of money because there was going to be a huge export economy in grains, and they were going to get rich doing so. And then the only grain deal of the 1970s, he helped arrange, along with Cargill and some of the grain traders, when the Soviet Union had grain failure. And he did that because he thought that it might help re-elect Richard Nixon, because farmers would look very favorably upon the Nixon administration. And of course, Richard Nixon did get re-elected. But the promises that Earl Butz made never came true, because, like I said, there was just 1 year that there was an export economy in grain in the 1970s. But unfortunately, because Earl Butz did go on the speaking tour and spoke for actually a few decades after he got fired for calling the Pope names at a food and agriculture meeting in Rome, kind of making fun of the Pope in a lewd way. And then he was overheard making terrible racial slurs. So eventually he got fired, but he lived to, I think, 101, and gave a lot of bad advice to farmers. And so what happened, I know you all know what happened, when there was no market, no export market, and farmers did borrow a lot of money, and they didn't have any way to get back the cost of production, and there was no way to sell these grains. The prices plummeted, and so the agricultural crisis really began, and we lost hundreds of thousands of farms during that period. And it was a really, really sad story, and the federal government, the Department of Agriculture, was very much responsible for it. So going into the 1980s, the politics of the nation had begun to change, and in part it was because of the lobbying of organizations like the Committee for Economic Development, and this vision of a more corporate-friendly economy. And so a number of economic interests did get together and raise a lot of money, and their candidate was Ronald Reagan, of course, who came into office with an agenda of deregulation. And one of the most important set of federal policies that they were targeting were our important antitrust laws. Now, from the end of the 1940s to the end of the 1970s, our antitrust laws worked pretty well. We didn't have a lot of mergers and acquisitions, and there was actually a lot of anger amongst certain industries because they were investigated for consolidation, like the grocery industry, for instance. The oil industry wanted to be consolidating. And so when President Reagan was elected, one of the first things he did was appoint to the Department of Justice and the Federal Trade Commission appointees who would carry out this deregulation. Now, in writing Foodopoly, I had the opportunity to interview Michael Perchuk, who had been a commissioner during this period at the Federal Trade Commission. And he told me really a tragic story about what happened to that agency, because it was it had Republican and Democratic appointees as commissioners, and Michael Perchuk said that they were pretty much agreed on these issues around competition, and that it was inappropriate for competitors to be allowed to merge or acquire one another. And in fact, he and a Republican colleague, who was also a commissioner appointed by the Nixon administration, wrote a 400-page report for Congress about the effects that this evisceration of antitrust law had. So what the appointee did at the Federal Trade Commission was, well, as you would expect, dramatically cut the budget, got rid of whole departments, started allowing mergers and acquisitions, things that had been prohibited before, and probably most important for the long term, changed the definition of what an antitrust violation is, narrowed it significantly. And so, as you know, since that time, we have had tremendous number of mergers and acquisitions. Even though we have an economic system that is supposed to be built on competition, we now have all federal policy basically directed at allowing companies to consolidate. And so it doesn't matter what industry you look at. We have duopolies. Maybe we have 3 or 4 in some industries that compete. And nowhere is it more striking than in the food industry, where we have this small group of very powerful corporations who really dictate everything about food and farm policy. So what happens when companies begin to get larger? Well, they get wealthier, right? They have a lot more money to work with. And so what happened in the 1980s and the beginning of the 1990s is we began to see companies in every industry get much, much more powerful. And in fact, it dramatically during this period changed our political parties, especially the Democratic Party, which began to receive, depending on the election that you're talking about, as much money for elections and as much lobbying as the Republican Party. And of course, we know the result today. We have 2 parties that basically agree on most economic issues. They've carved out a very narrow set of social issues they disagree on, or that they keep their base in a frenzy over, so that people don't get together and talk about the economic issues that actually bring us all together. But getting back to the food issues and the 1990s, so as these companies began to get larger and more powerful, they began to have a real effect on trade negotiations that were going on during this period at the end of the 1980s and the beginning of the 1990s. And so Ronald Reagan began with the deregulation of antitrust law. Bill Clinton was able to finish. And it was really under the Clinton administration that we began to see a lot of this deregulation and mergers happen. I think Iowa was especially affected by this because we saw pork industry really begin to consolidate during this period. Mergers that would at one time have not been allowed were just allowed to move right on ahead. And also with these trade negotiations, we basically saw a small group of corporations get together to write what became the agreements under the World Trade Organization and the North America Free Trade Agreement. And Cargill, during this period, the grain trader, put together a landmark coalition to work on the trade agreements. It had 100 different food and financial service companies involved in it, and they actually sat down and wrote the agreement on agriculture. This is pretty well known. And this isn't really about trade, because of course there will always be trade. This is about a few corporations benefiting from the shape of the rules of these trade agreements to allow companies to be able to move their operations wherever it's cheapest, and wherever labor is cheapest, wherever environmental regulations are weakest, wherever they can get away with the most things. And this has had a very dramatic effect on our economy, and I think it's one of the reasons that today 50% of Americans make $34,000 or less. Pretty dramatic statistic. But in the food industry, it's been really dramatic because they were able to reshape agriculture policy. And so to get farm policy in line with trade policy, there was a lot of pressure in 1996, 95, 96 to rewrite farm policy and to change the Farm Bill. And these protections from the 1930s had been chipped away, but there were some vestiges left. For instance, we had some supply management programs, some acreage could still be taken out of production for conservation programs. We had the grain reserve. With this legislation, and many of you probably remember it, it was called Freedom to Farm. And we know whenever freedom is attached to anything with federal policy, it's really bad news. So this legislation was basically a complete deregulation of farm policy, and it completely took the federal government's role out of supply management. And the grain traders, the companies who really want cheap commodities, so we're talking about the food processors, the grocery industry, all of the industries that really benefit when corn, soy, and other commodities have a low price, they got exactly what they wanted. So in 1998, the price of corn had dropped by 50%, the price of soy by 40%, and those of you who are old enough to remember will know that there was a lot of pressure on Congress to do something, and so because Congress didn't really want to fix the problems about too much supply, they started using taxpayer money to actually help support the farmers who were suffering so much so that they could stay in operation. And that was kind of the birth of the modern subsidy program, which will probably be completely eliminated in this farm bill and replaced with some kind of crop insurance. But I want to say about that subsidy program that is pretty much misunderstood by a lot of the urban organizations and environmental groups, because it isn't a subsidy that is really making these companies or farmers, we always hear that it's making farmers rich. What it's really doing is allowing mid-sized farmers to stay in business and a small percentage of the very largest farmers do get, a larger chunk of the money. But the USDA actually lies about how many farmers there are today. So a lot of these databases that you see from the environmental community that talk about subsidies are actually based on a fake number that the USDA uses. And, I think in part they're embarrassed that there's so few farmers left, and I think, they want to pull the wool over people's eyes. We really have fewer than 1 million full-time farmers today, and the USDA counts in this 2.5 million farmers, a third of them have sales of under $1,000. So that's like my friend who lives in Charlottesville, Virginia, and is retired from the university, loves the farmer's market, and goes with her flowers or sells them to a white tablecloth restaurant. It's kind of a hobby. Or it's like my neighbor in Virginia near my farm who's retired military. He is in the other category of farmers who aren't really farmers. They have under $10,000 in sales. He has a vineyard. He sells grapes to wineries. He likes the lifestyle. He's retired military. He doesn't consider himself a farmer. This is 2/3 of the individuals who are counted as farmers today. So that skews the database and makes it look like only the largest farmers actually get some kind of support, when in reality 82% of farmers get some kind of government subsidy. Now, our position is, if we're going to make the market work, then that's a good thing. We certainly don't need farmers, commodity farmers today, to be subsidized. But if we don't make the market work, then what's going to happen after this farm bill passes, and a lot of farmers don't kind of get this their payment? It's going to mean more consolidation of farms, because what happens when a farmer is out of business? Either the land goes to development, or one of the larger farms ends up picking up that land, renting it or buying it. And even the largest farmers that we hear about, who of course don't need these government payments, but even the largest ones, I think it's really notable, they have an average income of $260,000. The mid-sized farmer with sales of $100,000 to $250,000, they have an average income of $19,300, half of that for subsidy. So we're going to see a lot of pain after this farm bill passes, and it's not going to, I can guarantee you, getting rid of so-called subsidy programs is not going to solve our dysfunctional food system. It's going to lead to more consolidation, and it's going to make things worse, not better. And it's really unfortunate that these concepts are so difficult for people to understand, because I've been going around the country to a lot of urban audiences and trying to explain this to people who, really do want good farm policy, but don't understand this issue. So, I kind of look at these farmers who are very large and make the $260,000. I compare them to the Walmart or ConAgra. This is a drop in the bucket, and I really think our friends in the environmental community should start talking about the real people who are benefiting from these policies. So let's talk about some of those individuals and some of those companies. Just to break things up, I am going to read a list of brands, and I'm going to ask for a volunteer to tell us why I would list this particular set of brands. Okay. Pepsi, Mountain Dew, Aquafina, Sierra Mist, Tazo, Sobe, Slice, Lipton, Propel, Gatorade, Tropicana, Naked Juice, Captain Crunch, and Jemima, Near East, Rice-A-Roni, Pastaroni, Puffed Wheat, Harvest Crunch, Quaker Cracker, Quisp, King Vitamin, Mother's Lay's, Maui Style, Ruffles Doritos, Cheetos, Rolled Gold, Sun Chips, Sabertones, Cracker Jacks, Chester's, Granimals, Munchos, Smart Food, Baconettes, Matador, Hickory Sticks, Hostess Chips, Miss Vicky's, Munchies, True North, and there are a few more. Any ideas why I might have read that list? No?
Most of those are using genetically modified organisms.
That's true, but that's not why I read the list. Yes.
Do they all contain fructose corn syrup, or they don't?
A lot of them do, but that's not why I read the list. All of those brands are produced by the largest food company in the country, which is PepsiCo. So we go into the grocery store, and it looks like there's all of this diversity. And really, I mean, most of those foods aren't foods, right? It's hard to call PepsiCo a food company. But so you go into the grocery store. We have 20 food processing companies that own more than 60% of the brands in the grocery store. So it looks like there's all this amazing diversity and choice. But we have this few companies that really have benefited from the oversupply of these commodities. And then on top of those companies, they're very powerful, but they're really not the most powerful companies in the food chain. The most powerful companies in the food chain are the grocery industry, and they've really reshaped the industry. There are 4 grocery chains that control in many markets 70 to 90% of sales of groceries, and overall they control 50% across the country. There are Walmart on the top, the Kroger brands, Costco, and Target. And the Walmart heirs have completely reshaped our economy, the grocery industry, and farming and food. And they've done this by figuring out how to suck all the profit from the farm all the way up the supply chain into their coffers. And today, Walmart heirs have as much wealth as the bottom 40% of Americans. And I mean, that's a pretty stunning metaphor for what's wrong with our nation. But what they figured out how to do is to pass on the cost of doing business to suppliers. So everything from these high radio frequency tags that suppliers have to use, they track their products from where they're manufactured or produced, all the way to the Walmart stores. They pay for the shelf space, they have to pay for the tracking, they have to use the packaging, they have to use the materials. Walmart actually tells even Coke what kind of sweetener to use, or Levi jeans that they drove out of business, what kind of material to use. Or, they are so powerful that these processors, and if we're talking about consumer goods manufacturers, have to obey Walmart because Walmart is such a big piece of their business. I mean, consider that Walmart needs 1 billion pounds of beef every year. So Walmart doesn't want to deal with, 3 or 4 different meat packers, or 5 or 6. They want to deal with the biggest meat packers. And that's how we've seen a complete restructuring of the meat industry. I know has really impacted you, beginning in the 1970s with the consolidation, and so that by 1995, 30% of hogs were raised on factory farms. After the cheap grains from the deregulation in 1996 completely changed the meat industry, because these contract operations could buy feed before they had to produce it. So by 2007 rather, 95% of hogs were raised on factory farms. And today we know that we're seeing even more consolidation in the meat industry, with Smithfield now being sold to a Chinese company. So we've seen a very dramatic change in our food system, and it's driving consolidation. at every level. And I'll just end by telling a story about writing Foodopoly. You know, I understood a lot about meat because we work on meat issues a lot at Food and Water Watch. I never understood really how fruits and vegetables get to the grocery store. You know what? I knew that the trade agreements had put a lot of people all over the country out of business because today about 50% of our food comes from overseas. But I didn't understand the fruit and vegetable industry. And what I learned from going and spending some time in the Central Valley of California is that what's happened with the meat industry has also happened with produce. So, you know, we used to think maybe 20 years ago that farms in California were very large. Well, they are. They tend to have hundreds, sometimes thousands of acres of produce, usually specializing in a few different kinds. But even these very large produce farms are not profitable enough today to be independent. They have to be part of an empire of large shipper packers. These shipper packers are very heavily capitalized, sometimes by hedge funds. They have to have a lot of money to have huge warehouses, to have international operations, either contracted or ownership, so that they can provide this year-round produce. And it's not about seasonality, it's about the lowest price. Really doesn't matter what the season is. And they often arrange the harvesting for the produce farms. They do a lot of the services like the grading, the washing, the sorting, the packaging, and the marketing. So we have a set of shipper packers who then deal with a lot of the very largest grocery interests. But even they are really under a lot of pressure to be profitable because with the system that Walmart has devised and the other big box stores are following and the grocery industry that's trying to survive, they need a lot of, they need volume and they need very low prices. And Walmart is using predatory pricing around the country. So they come in and they lower prices and other grocery stores in the area can't survive. So I really didn't write Foodopoly to just give a lecture about how bad the food system is, because I think we all know how bad the food system is, and we're all really disappointed and upset about it. I really wrote Foodopoly to try to get the debate going amongst a lot of our allied organizations, especially in urban areas, about some of the finer points about what we have to do if we're going to change the food system. And I really believe that if we're going to change the food system, we have to strengthen our democracy, right? We're not going to fix the food system if we don't fix our democracy. And my hope is that we can begin to politicize some of these hundreds of thousands of people who now care about food and get them involved in a political arena so that we can begin to try to hold the people we elect accountable. It's great to vote with your fork. We need to vote with our vote, and then we need to try to keep these elected officials accountable, and especially the elected officials who are the closest to us. Because as I travel around the country and in Food and Water Watch's 17 state offices, what we see is our inability to keep the people that many of us work to elect accountable. So we need many, many more people, and we need much more civic engagement, and we need to bring lots of young people into the system because we don't want to leave a political system that really isn't a democracy, and that's where we're headed. So I think what's exciting is that I just see lots of young people getting involved, and I have a lot of hope that we really can change our political system. We really can take back our democracy, and in the long term, we really can have the kind of sustainability that, so that we can survive climate chaos and so that we can feed people in the future. So thanks so much. I really appreciate you all coming and hearing about Foodopoly, and I'm happy to take comments and questions.
how do they fit all of that in with the competition from GMO and getting organics? They got to ship it in from somewhere, and my understanding, organics is just not, without a lot of preservatives added into it. How are they going to keep it on the shelf?
Well, unfortunately, with the organic industry, we see the same kind of consolidation that we see in the conventional food industry. So those 20 large food processors that I was talking about own the largest organics brands. We have one dominant food store in the country that dominates organic grocery sales, and that's Whole Foods, which is also consolidated, bought its closest competitors, and figured out how to raise prices because it sells so many conventional foods. And we have a distributor, United Natural Foods Inc., that works with a lot of the produce industry in California that I was talking about. United Natural Foods Inc. is probably one of the reasons that organic produce is so expensive. Now, we do know that organic takes more labor to produce because you're not using herbicides. But it has the same shelf life as any other fruit or vegetable because it is a fruit or vegetable. It's just not raised using these chemicals. But what's happened is that these farms where organics are raised tend to be in the Central Valley of California or overseas somewhere. A lot of organics are now coming, for instance, from China. In fact, China is becoming one of the biggest producers of our food. Third largest producer of processed food in the country. And if you buy that organic Cascade Farms corn or edamame, good chance it's produced in China. So it's all about volume. And I think that's the answer to your question. It's about volume, and we need to change the policies that make it possible for 2 counties in California to grow most of the greens eaten in this country, whether they're organic or conventional, because that is just foolishness. So,
thank you for your short history lesson. I really appreciate it. I guess I have 2 questions. What would you say was the number one issue in the time period from the 40s to today that you think drove us to the direction we are? The number one issue. And the other part of that is, it's going to be Debbie Downer's question, but if nothing is changed in our political system, where do you see our food industry in 10 or 20 years?
Well, it's really hard to pick one issue because there are so many issues. I mean, I think the consolidation is one of the most dramatic things that has allowed companies to be able to cause a lot of the other problems, whether it's the overuse of pesticides, whether it's the fact that children see just under 5,000 junk food ads every year, the biotech industry's enormous political power. And, we just don't talk about consolidation or monopolization. It's just that the words aren't mentioned. It's never in the discussion. And I think that's one of the areas. I mean, there are a number of farm groups who are in this room, like George Naylor back there with the National Family Farm Coalition. They're advocating for a competition titled the Farm Bill. CCI, another very important organization. I mean, there's a lot of talk about how we need to have a competition title as a way to begin. In fact, to begin to talk about it so we could even get Congress or a committee in Congress to look at some impacts. So, I think there's a long way to go. I think that there are so many problems with our democracy that if we don't get together and start really getting politically active, that it's going to be very difficult to fix the food system, and there are going to be a lot of other significant problems, especially with climate issues. Yeah.
Yes. Well, as I understand it, what you're saying is it's going to take a group to make political changes. Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things I like about CCI is they are in fact a group that is working as a unit to get things done. But there aren't very many groups like this. The culture tends to encourage atomization, which is what they're trying to do. So my question again increase the cohesion and put together groups to encourage this kind of political change. Because
Well-
even the CCIs, they do a good job, but they're still kind of a small group.
Well, I always say that it's the truth. I don't just say it in Iowa. That if we had a CCI in every state, we wouldn't be in the shape that we're in today, and that really is the truth. You know, I think that it begins with the organizing at the local level. And, you know, unfortunately, the way people on, I'm going to say the left, come to politics is through issues. So you look at the right. The right has a belief system. You know, I would say a lot of it is focused on self-interest and, you know, kind of greed. And that is one set of issues, and everything that they do, they judge by this very narrow set of issues. On our side, we have hundreds of issues, and there isn't a theology or a set of beliefs that kind of bring everybody together. You know, a lot of people don't have a problem with deregulation. You know, we have an education system today that doesn't necessarily teach a lot of these deeper political values about what's wrong with our country. And so you see a lot of really well-meaning people working on dozens of issues that are kind of competing with one another for funding and so forth. So, you know, I'm no expert at this, but in my experience, I think it really has to start at the local and state level, trying to do better with our state legislatures. Now, I know you have pretty strict laws here in Iowa about gerrymandering, but one of the reasons that, you know, where every 10 years we need to redistrict, and then the redistricting that the state legislature does determines who goes to Congress. So we have lunatics in Virginia, where I'm from, for a big chunk of the state that has the most population. So I have a district that's gerrymandered to look like a snake to dilute the votes of Northern Virginia. So, you know, we send people to Congress who do not represent the population of Virginia. And that's happening in state after state. And I think that that's one of the places that we really need to start at the state level, is trying to bring people together with these different issues, and to try to get a coalition together for elections, and to go back to more of the old-fashioned kind of work on elections. It's not just ads. Because I know, you know, in most of our lifetimes, those of you who are older, we've seen the base that used to go out and work for candidates kind of become much smaller, and today elections are all about money. I think we're going to have a constitutional amendment around Citizens United and campaign finance reform. And I know at Food and Water Watch we're talking a lot about that for the future. I think that's going to take people working on every social economic justice issue really coming together, because it's going to be very hard, but we've got to do it. Well, Matt, who works for Food and Water Watch, was telling me about it, but I do know about it, but I understand it was people from the biotech industry.
One of them, Monsanto.
Yeah. Well, we know that the biotech industry spent a lot of money on public policy. At Food and Water Watch, we did a 10-year study of how much the biotech industry has spent on lobbying, campaign contributions, $572 million. They hired 13 members of Congress, 300 staff former staff in the White House and Congress. They have 100 lobby shops in Washington, and I think that gets them things like the World Food Prize, and it's why we have the GE policy that we have today. And I think it, you know, goes back to that money in politics. But there's no doubt that genetic engineering is really bringing a lot of people into politics right now, and I'm pretty excited to see. And I think 30 states now, people working for labeling legislation for GE foods. And, you know, I think a campaign like that, because I think ultimately it will be successful in several states. You know, people get involved in issues, they get kind of the taste of success, and building political power, and we'll come back for more issues, right? So we need to keep that kind of organizing up. Way back in the gas.
I heard a story about Walmart's annual meeting last week. They mentioned the protesters, the CEOs pay tax $20 million, 1,000 times greater than the average Walmart worker. I've seen information that Costco is more equitable than that in their compensation and leadership. Do you know anything about that, and should we just shop locally owned stores, food markets? What's the solution to this?
Well, I think Costco has better policies, but we don't want these giant stores that require volume, because whenever you need volume, it means that you need low prices, means the market isn't working properly. So, I think there's no perfect way to shop, because we're stuck with the kind of marketplace we have. And as much as you can afford to do business with independent stores, shop at farmers markets, shop where you can, I think it's great. I don't think we're going to change the food system by how we shop, but I do think we can build community, we can build our own health, and we can use these wonderful local food programs as a way to get to know other people who are interested, bring people into the political system, support local farmers, but I think it's a small piece of the pie. I mean, I would never say, I'm not the shopping police, so I know I personally can't go into a Walmart, but I just think it's everything that's wrong with our society. And I read The Packer, which is a magazine for the produce industry, a newspaper, and there was a big article in there today referring to the New York Times kind of expose about Walmart. Walmart laid off so many people that they haven't been able to keep up their produce. So people have been very angry at Walmart, because when they go in there and they buy fruits and vegetables, they spoil very quickly, or they're not very good. So Walmart has a whole new publicity stunt where they're saying that if you buy something and it's not good, you get your money back. And the article was pointing out that they probably even, and this is an industry magazine, that they probably will do a 15-minute training in the break room on how to deal with produce. So it's going to be very difficult to solve this problem. So I think Walmart probably doesn't have the best quality of goods.
I think you haven't touched on how these large corporations have infiltrated our universities. And for example, at Iowa State, the Leopold Center for Sustainable Agriculture is on the second floor. And on the ground floor is a whole wing that is named Monsanto Wing.
Yes.
And so there's a schizophrenia in these universities. And people are fighting one another because they ideologically agree. The other thing that I think needs to be said is that the industrial agricultural system that we're practicing now is ruining the soil. We have lost large amounts of organic matter. We're having tremendous erosion problems, as well as poor water quality as a result of the runoff of contaminants. And yet, it just seems like it's going on. And now biofuels is coming into that same, causing those same problems. And I attended a training session that NRCS put on this past week, a week before, I think. And it was a breath of fresh air, because they have a soil ecologist who's saying we have to store the organic matter and the soil health if we're going to maintain production over time. And that's the kind of thing we really need to do. And so I think there's a huge amount of problems. And Richard Wolff, who's an economist that I like to read, I think has got some ideas about how to change this democracy. And instead of having corporate entities, we need to have co-ops, cooperative organizations locally that will do say in how that co-op is run.
I couldn't agree with you more. Very well said. We do have a report on universities being bought by companies, if you're interested in this issue, that goes through a number of universities. Matt, do you remember the Food and Water Watch report?
Public research, private gain.
Public research, private gain. You can get it on our website, foodandwaterwatch.org.
And it's also not just universities. I'm a high school teacher, and I'm aware of the school district that I work at, and also of at least 5 others where Monsanto's come in and bought them all new science projects, and has struck community, or science curriculum, excuse me, and started community guards there, but they're all jail.
Right. That's so true. And we published a report a couple weeks ago that's worth looking at called Biotech Ambassadors. That's a result of about a year's worth of work looking at State Department cables, and our State Department is acting as a PR arm for Monsanto and the biotech industry, twisting the arm of developing countries to move to genetic engineering, to not pass laws for labeling genetically engineered food. It is shocking what our State Department
Well,
is
and the
doing.
school districts are signing 10 contracts and promising not only new curriculum, but $100,000 a year in support. So there's a lot of school districts in Iowa that are signing on to
It's
this.
terrible.
And you don't
One,
fight it.
one more comment, and then we have a couple of other speakers.
I just want to say that at the same time the World Food Prize is going on, we're having a symposium here in Des Moines. We're having everyone that we can think of to promote, to press, to promote to Des Moines, to promote to Iowa. Another look at agriculture, healthy planet, healthy food. And we're bringing in Francis Moore-LePay. We'd like you to come. We're bringing George Naylor, Fred Kirschman, Francis Tickey, Denise O'Brien, many more. But it's going to be, and also the World Sovereignty Prize is coming at the same time. So we're trying to say there's another vision of agriculture besides World Food Prize.
Wonderful. You want to say the date and
It's
location?
going to be Saturday, October 19th, and it's going to be at the Unitarian Church, and Women's International League for Peace and Freedom sponsoring it.
Great. Wonderful. So I think Adam from CCI is going to come say a few things. Thanks so much.
So I first met Winona a couple of years ago when she was writing Foodopoly. And real quick, just thank Winona again for being here today. Yeah. And then 2 years ago when she was at the CCI convention, I got to meet her again and actually was able to have her as a guest at our house after the convention. So it's a pleasure to see you again. Thank you, Winona. My name is Adam Mason. I'm the State Policy Organizing Director at Iowa CCI. And I'm amazed, I haven't had a chance to read it yet. I'm buying my copy tonight. As many of you are, I'm sure, we're buying the locally at Riverdale Books, which is exciting to me. I just live 3-4 blocks away. And I know there's probably a book club up in Ames that might be reading this book pretty soon. Joe and Bob and Herb taking this home to read with the book club. So make sure and get a copy tonight. It's just always amazing how much we learn at events like this and from folks like Winona. And one of the things that just kind of continues to keep me hopeful is I see so many familiar faces in here. I see a lot of new faces in here too. We got folks, as Winona mentioned, folks who do it the right way. Folks like Stacey Hartman, who runs Small Potatoes CSA. Folks like George Naylor, that's right. Yeah. We're in a locally owned bookstore that does it right? And that's important. But a lot of questions that I also heard, Peter, you were talking about this, Pat, you mentioned this, is that the importance of organization. Because this isn't something that just happened overnight, is it? That's what Winona's book really tells us, is that this has been a long thought out plan. We're not going to change it overnight. But that's the importance of being organized, and like Winona said, of starting locally, starting with the grassroots, the local, the state levels. And that's why at CCI we're so happy to work with Food and Water Watch on so many different issues. Whether it's GMO labeling at the State House, stronger regulations on factory farms, fighting fracking or fracking mining, issues like that, and ultimately taking on corporate control of our democracy. Like Winona said, we have to take all of these issues together, but to take action, we're going to have to confront that corporate control of our food system through the corporate control of our democracy. And we don't do that alone. We do that by being members of organizations.
Yep.
And Peter, you pointed out, and thank you, Nona, for the compliment every time. If there was a CCI in every state to have this done. But how many states was it that Food and Water was in? 17. And CCI is part of a network with other organizations and other states too. So that's how we're going to get it done. And tonight, we'd like to extend the invitation for you to become a member of both organizations. And like I said, I saw a lot of familiar faces tonight. So many of you probably already are a member of either CCI or maybe Food and Water Watch. That might be how you found out about it. If you're not, we'd like to invite you to join CCI and Food and Water Watch tonight. A 2-for-1 special. $35 will get you a membership to both organizations tonight only. Okay? See Matt Olaf right over there. He'll help sign you up. Now, if you already are a member, this doesn't just happen. It happens because we're here, we're out there talking to folks every day. Okay? So if you would consider it, we'd ask you to give a donation tonight above and beyond your annual membership. Okay? So consider that, please. And of course, you're going to buy the book tonight too. I am, for sure. One other big thing is that what do we do next? Well, we get involved. We join organizations. We start organizing our friends, our neighbors, our churches, organizing events, and taking on the World Food Prize. Okay? One other thing we can do is go to the CCI convention. I'm going to promote it real quick. Like I said, Winona was there 2 years ago. This year, Michelle Merkel, who's a great environmental lawyer, is going to be there talking about basically what we can do to take on the EPA to crack down on pollution, as well as a number of other issues. Larry Cohen, an international labor leader who wants labor unions and community organizations and faith organizations working together on corporate control of our democracy, is going to be the keynote speaker, so you don't want to miss that. I've got these brochures if you want information about that. Okay? Last thing, and I'll get out of here, because I know folks probably have more questions. They want to get this book so they can get home, take it back to the book club names. We're inviting folks to join us across the street at Hallie's locally owned restaurant tonight for just a reception. Grab an iced tea. I'm going to have a beer, maybe some appetizers. So you're welcome to join us. Let's have a conversation, join in community, and talk about what we can do next to take on not only the corporate control of our food systems, but the corporate control of our democracy, okay? Sound good? Yeah. Everybody going to be there? All right. Thank you.
Was there a sign sheet going around?
There was. I forgot to mention that. If you have not signed in, why is it important to sign in, Hugh? Why is it important to sign in?
Get the scoop on what's coming up.
And it's like, you could have 50 or 60 people like we have here tonight at a meeting, and everybody goes home, you don't have their contact information. It's like a tree fell in forest and we saw it.
Well, it's also that we have so many good people and so many different organizations
Yeah.
that aren't working together.
Yeah, I mean, I'm
Like she said,
part of Occupy, but I do stuff with Food and Water Watch, you know.
but we need to bring
Yeah, and because we're also taking on the World Food Prize again this year, like we did last year.
We're all about really the same
Yeah.
core values. And we need to have a common vision.
Are you ready? Okay, good. Winona will sign books here. You can just get a book and then pay for it on your way out. With the crowd, we'll figure it out. So just be patient with us. We'll get you out of here, and it's gonna be good. So thank you for coming tonight.
Let's give one more big round of applause for Winona and for giving that book.
We'll get you a chair here.
Yeah, I have a pen.
Okay.
And if it dries up, we get you another one.
I do have.
She needs a chair, I think.
Yeah, that's someone who's gonna.
Sure. You have good exhibits in your state. We have.
Oh, here's a piece of work, that's for sure. I'm going to give you a close-up of this book so you can see the title. For getting their book signed. I'm live streaming it, so just kind of giving a close-up of the book to my viewers, so they can see the title and the author.
Just grab one, sign it for you, and you can pay on the way out.
We're going to get their copy signed who are choosing to buy them tonight, and I'll stick around and just catch some conversations. In the meantime, I'll thank you for watching, and so I'll just go on for a little while longer before some of us go over to the Tally's for reception. I will not stream that, but I'll be hanging out there for a while.
Sure, absolutely. October 9th is all I know.
And if you're giving me your contact information, we send stuff out. Women's International will do it well. Is doing
Would you also like to know when Jim Hightower will do his public talk here in Jim Hightower? Yeah, we scored him.
He's coming to Des Moines?
Yes. On October 16th. Yeah, during as part of our Occupy World Food Prize second time around. And
we're thinking September 7th.
Yes.
Progressive Magazine Lunch in Madison.
Yeah, but this is like the 16th.
Yeah.
October 16th is when we got him, and so he will speak at.
Once in a while, I have to sleep and eat.
But we're cross promoting their event.
Yeah.
And so because
I'll keep touch on that.
so he'll be here in town on the 16th.
Thank you, Sherry. Sherry, nice to meet you, Sherry. Are you part of CCI?
Yeah.
We're going to have a save the date.
Anyway.
But I'll keep promoting more of that when we get more. We're going to have more activities coming up. Right now, we just have his speech on on the 16th.
Well, you can't even find a frog anymore, let alone tadpole.
If you do, it's got 2 heads.
With 6 eyes.
But I can't think of the exact location right now. I'd have to look that up. But yeah. But we'll publicize that. I put it on Facebook, and I'll tweet it. And but you know, other organizations will cross promote it, like Will promote it because Sharon Donovan is a member of Will, and so is. And then we also, if you know Deb Franco, she's a member of Will. So you can get the scoop from the other members.
Section of I'm in 4 inches of agriculture and food waste. Another layer of lead waste. And then got up on top and tamped it down.
So I thought about it, but decided.
And we got a score, Jim Hightower.
Yeah.
That is such a score, getting him here.
We saw it in the email they sent out. I want to say it was Will. I want to
Are you still documenting?
Yeah, I am.
And you got your thing coming up too.
Yeah, we scored Jim Hightower.
Yeah, that's going to be great.
Yeah. Too bad we would love to get one done to Shiva, but I just found out from us that she's sick right now, so she's to suspend her activities till she gets better. But maybe in the future, if we can get her here to Iowa, that would be such a draw.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Because I've seen her in like 3 documentaries, and there's so many more on YouTube and elsewhere that you can find that she's in. Or just clips of just her, excerpts from these different documentaries, So that would be awesome if we could get her in Iowa.
Yep.
Did it take? October 16th.
16th, okay, and then our thing is on the 19th.
Yeah, so, we promote that one, and you guys promote ours, and we work together.
Hey, George.
So, and among other things, so, like she said, we got to get all kinds of people together to do this, so we can actually get something done and get back on the right track.
Jan, Tucker Jan. Yeah, no. Here, people. No, he's in a movie at any price. George Naylor.
No way!
Yeah, Fleur Theater.
Well, knock me backwards.
George is in it. It's called Any Price at the Fleur. Yeah, George is in it at any price.
What's the topic of the movie?
What's that?
What's the topic of the movie?
About farming, about tough time on the farm, and kind of some conflict between a father and a son. But yeah, George thought it did a pretty good job of laying out stuff. Yeah, he's in it. I mean, it's for like 5 seconds.
You have to really watch.
Hey,
he's a movie star.
yeah, he might be asking for autographs.
Oh yeah, you're a problem.
For those who don't know, George Naylor is an organic farmer who is also a farm advocate and activist and has taken part in several events around the country over the past few years trying to promote sustainable agriculture and to get rid of GMO.
Anyway.
It's nice to see people younger than me in here. But some of these people went through Occupy, part of Occupy Win, and we're doing our second year Occupy the World Food Prize. And now that we know who is going to get it this year, we are going to start digging up some dirt on these characters, especially one who works in Monsanto. It is. And the Supreme Court's owned Clarence Thomas. He used to be a Monsanto attorney. A lot of people don't know that, but yeah, he's one of the lead Monsanto attorneys before he got into being a judge. So yeah, so he's been exposed, and now we got 3 more screwballs to expose. And getting Jim Hightower here is a big score. Yeah, he's one of the major experts on corporate ag and how bad it is for us, for not only for our food but for the economy in general. So yeah, it's a great score to get him here. We could get Vandana Shiva, but we'll have to try for her for another year. Yeah. I've seen her in documentaries, and if you haven't seen her, just look her up on YouTube, and she will just knock your socks off. She'll take your autograph. Sure.
I can't talk to you now.
That's okay. Well, I'm going to be shutting this off anyway. But, yeah, I'm probably getting low on juice anyway.